What if Elon Musk, the world's most enigmatic billionaire, lost everything, his companies, his freedom, even his reputation, overnight? It wasn't a headline anyone expected, yet there it was, bold, blinking across every major news network, breaking: Elon Musk faces criminal indictment for corporate espionage. The words echoed across screens, phones, living rooms, Wall Street terminals. People gasped. Some cheered. Some wept. Others stared in stunned silence. But one woman, sitting alone in a dusty office in Oakland with a flickering desk lamp and a lukewarm cup of coffee, narrowed her eyes at the headline. Jessica Cole had read hundreds of legal filings, hundreds of stories crafted to destroy a person's legacy, and this one? This one felt like a script written too perfectly. That morning had started like any other. She was skimming through contract disputes and corporate litigation gossip, just trying to find a new lead to chase, when a single email arrived. No subject. No signature. Just a line: "They're framing him. It's bigger than you think." Attached was a link to the full indictment, sealed documents not yet available to the public, and a digital trail leading straight to her name. She blinked. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. The cursor blinked back. Then her phone rang. An unlisted number. Against better judgment, she answered. Jessica Cole speaking. A pause. Then a voice, confident and clipped: "You're the one who took down Parkwood Holdings in 22. It wasn't a question. "Who is this?" she replied. "Let's just say I work closely with someone who's in very deep trouble. Elon Musk. He needs someone outside the machine. Someone not afraid to go toe-to-toe with it." Jessica sat back. Her breath caught in her throat. "You want me to help Elon Musk?" "No," the voice said. "He wants you to help find the truth." That call would lead Jessica into the center of the most explosive legal case of the decade. As the indictment papers splashed across media, so did speculation: had Musk really used insider data to sabotage competitors? Was he blackmailing regulators? Had he crossed the line between innovation and espionage? The charges were complex, laced with techno-jargon and allegations that stretched into global markets, military tech, and corporate security. But behind the noise, Jessica felt something was off. Musk wasn't panicking. He wasn't denying. He was quiet. Too quiet. The courtroom was already buzzing with federal attorneys preparing opening salvos. Former executives were being subpoenaed. Tesla's board issued statements of concern. SpaceX halted launches pending review. Twitter/X became a war zone of opinion. But not once did Musk tweet. Not a single cryptic message. That silence. That was what chilled Jessica most. That, and the whispered warning in her inbox. She turned back to her screen. The indictment leaned heavily on testimony from two former employees, both fired, both reportedly disgruntled. The government was citing confidential data breaches, suggesting Musk had manipulated satellite deployments to interfere with competing networks. The claim was wild. But not impossible. Still, something didn't align. These were people Musk had trusted for years. Why betray him now? And why did the digital trail seem cleaner than it should be? Almost too polished. Jessica wasn't new to this. She'd been a federal investigator before burning out during a corruption probe involving her own firm's partners. She'd lost her job. Her marriage. Even her apartment. But what she hadn't lost was her ability to see patterns, connections hidden beneath legal noise. She clicked through the files again. That's when she found it. Buried in the metadata of a leaked exhibit was a name, M. Strauss. That name hadn't been public in years, not since the former CEO of Triarch Systems had mysteriously vanished after a failed merger with Tesla back in 2019. Jessica's pulse quickened. If Strauss was involved, this wasn't just a legal hit job, it was a vendetta. A calculated, Cold War disguised as a courtroom drama. She leaned forward, fingers flying across the keyboard, cross-referencing whistleblower filings, triangulating emails, and mapping out shell corporations. Within the hour, she'd built a digital wall of red flags stretching from Silicon Valley to DC. This wasn't about tech theft. It was about control. Political. Economic. Personal. The next day, she boarded a red-eye to San Francisco. She didn't know exactly what she was stepping into, but something inside her, a long-dormant flame, told her this was the moment her life had been leading to. On the plane, her thoughts spun. Was Musk truly innocent? Or just playing the best chess game of his life? Could she trust the source who'd contacted her? And more urgently, why her? When she landed, she was met by a silent black SUV. The driver didn't speak. Just handed her a note, handwritten, "You'll know the truth when you see it. But be ready, everyone has a price." That evening, she was ushered through a side entrance of a private compound outside Palo Alto. There, beneath towering redwoods and sleek glass buildings, she finally came face to face with Elon Musk. He was dressed simply, eyes shadowed by days without sleep. He didn't offer pleasantries. "You were recommended," he said flatly. "You think different. That's rare. Most lawyers think inside the system. You don't." Jessica nodded slowly. "Why me?" He paused. "Because I'm not looking for someone to defend me. I'm looking for someone to find what they buried. You up for that?" Her throat was dry, but her voice came steady. "I'm in." For a moment, something unreadable passed through Musk's eyes. Relief? Doubt? Or just calculation? He gestured to a tablet on the table. "Start there. That's everything they don't want the jury to see." Jessica picked it up, the screen blinking to life with layers of encrypted files. "One question," she said. "Did you do it?" Musk looked her in the eye, unwavering. "I did things they'll never understand. But I didn't betray this country. And I didn't betray my people." Outside, a helicopter passed overhead. Inside, the war was only beginning. And Jessica knew she was no longer just a spectator. She was the only one who could tip the scale. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The last time Jessica Cole had set foot in a federal courtroom, she'd been walking out with her reputation in tatters and her license on the line. She hadn't been the one on trial, but the shame stuck just the same. It was supposed to have been a career-defining moment. She had spent years building the case against a pharmaceutical giant accused of suppressing clinical trial data, but when she discovered her own law firm had buried evidence to protect the client, she blew the whistle. The fallout was swift and brutal. Her name was dragged through headlines. Her ex-husband, who had once sworn they were on the same side of justice, publicly distanced himself. The firm collapsed, but so did her life. That was 2 years ago. Since then, Jessica had become something else, an independent legal researcher, a ghost in the system, hired quietly by firms too proud to admit they needed her. She didn't work in glass towers anymore. She worked in a cramped second-floor walk-up above a pawn shop in Oakland, walls lined with dusty books, sticky notes, and coffee rings on every surface. Clients came to her when they had nowhere else to turn. She hadn't touched a courtroom in over 700 days. Until now. The Musk case didn't come with paperwork or contracts or any of the usual trappings. Just access. She'd been given one encrypted tablet and a non-disclosure agreement she had to sign using retinal scan verification. Elon Musk didn't do things the normal way, and Jessica wasn't surprised. She was surprised, though, by what she found on that tablet. Dozens of memos flagged, confidential, internal emails from Tesla's security division, SpaceX engineering reports, satellite deployment logs, SEC transcripts, and a disturbing number of private surveillance captures, all legally gray, possibly illegal, and undeniably explosive. The deeper she dug, the more the shape of the indictment came into view. The government wasn't charging Musk with something simple. They were accusing him of building a covert intelligence network under the guise of tech infrastructure, using Starlink satellites to intercept data from foreign and domestic competitors, then leveraging that information to influence energy markets and strategic investment flows. It sounded like a sci-fi movie plot. But the evidence, if real, was meticulously curated to support it. Jessica could feel the narrative forming, not just in legal terms, but in the court of public opinion. The prosecution's documents were structured like a screenplay: Musk the rogue innovator, the Machiavellian mastermind who saw himself above the law. But to Jessica, it felt too smooth. Real corruption cases were messy, contradictory, full of gaps. This case felt manicured. She ran the metadata on the reports. Some timestamps had been overwritten. Others showed signs of backdating. When she cross-referenced two whistleblower testimonies, she noticed something strange: identical phrasing across supposedly separate accounts. Leveraged operational blindness. Systematic bypass of legal oversight. No normal employee would write like that. It read like it had been written by someone crafting a weaponized narrative. She highlighted the patterns and flagged them. That evening, she received another message. This one was signed Michael Reyes. He claimed to be an internal ethics advisor from Tesla who'd resigned just weeks before the indictment was filed. He asked for a meeting. Alone. Jessica hesitated. Everything about this case was screaming caution. But something in her gut told her she needed to hear what he had to say. They met in a rundown diner in Daly City, just off Highway 280. Reyes was younger than she expected, maybe early 30s, wearing a hoodie and ball cap pulled low. He didn't order food. Just coffee. "You're not recording this, right?" he asked. "No," Jessica replied, setting her phone face down. "You worked at Tesla?" "For years. Ethics and compliance." "Why did you leave?" "Because I found out what they were planning," he said, glancing over his shoulder. "Not Elon. The others. The board's been compromised. At least 2 members were feeding data to outside interests, hedge funds, possibly government-linked firms. They needed Musk out of the way." Jessica listened without reacting. They knew he wouldn't play ball on certain technologies. He's too driven. Too unpredictable. They tried to sideline him. He pushed back. That's when the data leak started. "And the indictment?" "It's a misdirection play," Reyes whispered. "They made it look like Musk was the one manipulating systems. But it wasn't him. It was them. He found out. That's why they moved fast to burn him." Jessica leaned in. "Do you have proof?" "No. But I know where you might find it." He slid a card across the table. "No name, just a set of GPS coordinates and a 6-digit passcode. It's a server cache. Used to be one of our remote dev environments. Elon didn't even know it existed. It's where the backup logs went before they could sanitize the records." "Why tell me?" Jessica asked. "Because I believe he's the only person crazy enough to take them down. And because you're not tied to anyone. You burned your bridges. That makes you dangerous." He stood. "And one more thing. If you go looking, you'll be followed." That night, Jessica barely slept. She stared at the coordinates for hours. There was no guarantee anything would be there. But if it was, this case wasn't just a tech trial. It was an information war. The next morning, Jessica checked her rearview mirror before leaving. Twice. She took side streets. Switched cars in the Tenderloin. Parked 3 blocks from the location. The coordinates led her to a nondescript warehouse near the Port of Oakland. Inside, the place looked abandoned: dust, broken equipment, cracked windows. But behind a false wall, she found it. A cold room, humming quietly. Dozens of servers blinking. She used the passcode. A soft green light turned solid. The system booted. She was in. The logs were encrypted, but the headers alone were enough to make her heart race. Internal comms audit. Board correspondence log. Regulatory briefings, unpublished. Names flashed, names that shouldn't have been there. Government contractors. Intelligence firms. Private equity leaders. And one folder labeled Strauss Memo. Jessica opened it. A full document unfolded, a strategy note dated 2020, laying out a step-by-step plan to remove Musk from operational control using a combination of internal whistleblowing, regulatory manipulation, and public framing. It was signed, Martin Strauss. Her hands shook. She downloaded everything to a secure drive and left as quietly as she'd entered. The next day, she walked back into Musk's compound, placed the drive on his desk, and said, "I think I just found your smoking gun." Musk didn't say anything at first. He stared at her, expression unreadable. Then he picked up the drive, turned it over in his hand, and smiled, just slightly. "You really are different," he said. Jessica exhaled slowly. "They're coming for you hard. And they're good at hiding the strings. But now we've got the whole playbook." "Then it's time to change the game," he replied. And just like that, Jessica Cole was back in the fight. Not for money. Not for redemption. But for the truth, and for the first time in years, she believed in what she was doing. She didn't know how deep the conspiracy went. She didn't know who she could trust. But she knew this, the courtroom wasn't ready for what was coming. By the end of the week, Jessica Cole knew more than she wanted to. She'd seen power games before, but this was something else entirely. This was layered deception, like a matryoshka doll of corporate warfare, where each revelation uncovered a bigger lie beneath it. The files from the hidden server weren't just technical logs or strategy documents, they were blueprints of betrayal. The digital breadcrumbs she followed pointed to a quiet coup being staged not with guns or threats, but with memos, media leaks, and legal maneuvering. And Elon Musk, love him or hate him, was the target. Jessica worked through the night, decrypting what she could, feeding the rest through AI scramblers and forensics tools that Elon's team had reluctantly given her access to. The more she read, the more clear the story became. Someone within Tesla's own executive team had been coordinating with external parties for months, possibly years, laying the groundwork for Musk's removal. It wasn't just corporate politics, it was a full-blown operation. At the center of it was the ghost from her earlier discovery, Martin Strauss. Publicly, he had disappeared after the Triarch Tesla deal collapsed in 2019, blamed for overreaching and poor due diligence. But in reality, Strauss hadn't just walked away, he'd gone underground, pulled strings from the shadows, and, according to these files, quietly aligned himself with rival tech conglomerates that wanted Musk sidelined. One of the emails recovered from the cache read, "We can't let him reach stage 4 deployment. If that goes live, control shifts to the engineers. That's unacceptable." It was signed with a ciphered signature, but the metadata confirmed its source, someone on Tesla's board. Jessica cross-referenced it against board rosters, meeting schedules, and personnel access logs. The puzzle pieces began to fit. There was someone, maybe two, feeding data to the government's prosecutorial team while also manipulating internal compliance to generate incriminating records against Musk. It was professional character assassination disguised as oversight. Jessica needed proof that could hold up in court, and more importantly, she needed to know who within the legal team could be trusted. So far, that list was painfully short. She'd been given contact with only a few key figures, an operations chief named Dana Rowe, a young attorney named Malik Tran, and a communications director, Vanessa Burke. Jessica decided to start with Malik. She arranged a meeting under the pretense of reviewing trial strategy updates, but her goal was clear: test his loyalty. They met in a glass-walled conference room at a law office in San Francisco's Embarcadero Center. The room was modern and sterile, the kind of place where truth went to get smothered by contracts. Malik was sharp, polite, and clearly intelligent. Too intelligent. His eyes darted as he spoke, always measuring. Jessica steered the conversation carefully. "I've been reviewing the whistleblower submissions," she said casually. The syntax and structure, they read like they were drafted by someone with legal experience. Almost scripted. Malik tilted his head. "Are you suggesting internal manipulation?" "I'm suggesting the possibility that someone was helping them frame their language to align with prosecutorial themes. Almost like a pre-coached narrative." He didn't flinch, but she saw it, just a flicker of tension in his jaw. "That's a serious accusation," he said smoothly. "So is espionage," she replied. "I'm not here to play politics. I'm here to find the truth. And right now, that truth stinks." He didn't respond. He just gathered his notes and said, "If you uncover anything actionable, I hope you'll share it through proper channels." "I'll share it with Elon," she said, meeting his gaze. "And I'll let him decide what's proper." After he left, Jessica ran a deep scan on his legal history. There it was, a quiet secondment in 2021 to a DC firm known for white-glove crisis management. That same firm had represented clients in 3 major federal investigations involving tech competitors. Coincidence? Not likely. Jessica compiled a report and flagged Malik as a potential internal risk. She shared it only with Musk, using a direct encrypted line he'd given her on day 1. His response was short: "Watch him. But don't expose him yet. Let's see what he does next." That same night, another encrypted message landed in her inbox. Anonymous again. One line: "Check Vanessa's media relations log from 2 weeks before the indictment." Jessica hesitated. Burke was polished and guarded, with a background in political media campaigns. She was Musk's public armor, but now Jessica suspected she might be a double agent. She accessed the log using back-end credentials Musk had granted her. The entries were innocuous at first: press inquiries, media briefings, internal PR memos. But then she found a set of scheduled calls with a known journalist from a major financial outlet, someone who'd broken several anti-Musk stories just days before the indictment. One call had been made late at night, flagged as off-record follow-up. Jessica clicked into the metadata and froze. The file had been accessed again after being closed, by someone using a VPN routed through Virginia. NSA territory. Government-level encryption. She saved the trail and locked the log behind new credentials. The walls were closing in. Musk's public silence had been interpreted by the media as arrogance, but Jessica now realized it was strategy. He wasn't fighting this in public, he was letting the enemy reveal itself, one mistake at a time. But time was running out. The pre-trial hearings were days away. She needed something ironclad. That's when she got the break she didn't expect. A junior paralegal from Tesla's legal division, someone Jessica had barely noticed in the background, slipped her a note during a security briefing. It read, "I know about Project Antler. Meet me at Battery Spencer after dark." The name meant nothing at first. Project Antler? It sounded like a code name. She did a search and found nothing. But when she looked deeper into Tesla's archival engineering projects, she found a subfolder labeled ANTLR_4. It was locked. She couldn't crack it. The junior employee's name was Lila Hammond. Fresh out of Berkeley Law. Quiet, observant, and apparently, dangerously curious. That night, wrapped in layers against the freezing Marin wind, Jessica met her at Battery Spencer, the overlook point above the Golden Gate Bridge. "Thank you for coming," Lila said, her voice barely audible over the wind. "They're going to pin this whole thing on him." But Project Antler was never about surveillance. Jessica leaned in. Then what was it? It was a failsafe. Musk designed it to detect internal sabotage, an autonomous audit system embedded in the firmware of every Tesla device manufactured after 2020. It logged anomalies, remote access attempts, unauthorized patch deployments. It was supposed to be internal only, but someone leaked pieces of it and reframed it as illegal data collection. Do you have access? No. But I know who does. Lila handed Jessica a USB drive. This gets you into the Antler dashboard. If it's still online, it'll show you every breach, every manipulation, everything they tried to erase. Jessica took the drive and looked at her. Why are you doing this? Because I believed in the mission, Lila said. And because truth matters. Even now. That night, Jessica plugged the drive into her tablet and entered the Antler dashboard. It lit up like a Christmas tree. Unauthorized data access. Spliced code injections. Firmware rollbacks triggered remotely. And in the center of it all, calls routed through DC, all tagged under a single internal ID, MSTR-001. Martin Strauss. The final piece had just dropped into place. She ran a secure trace, captured the logs, and compiled the evidence. Elon would have to see this. The next morning, as Jessica sat across from him in the war room beneath his compound, she said simply, "We have it. Proof of the setup. Proof of the breach. And proof that someone on the board helped make it happen." Musk didn't smile. He didn't blink. He simply reached forward, tapped the screen to pause the dashboard, and said, "Then it's time to turn the courtroom into a theater. And give them a show they'll never forget." The first time Jessica saw Elon Musk truly vulnerable, it wasn't in a courtroom or under media fire, it was in the quiet stillness of his private design lab, surrounded not by lawyers or advisors but by whiteboards scribbled with half-formed equations and prototype sketches for technologies years away from public release. He was staring at a wall-sized projection of Earth, rotating slowly under a blanket of satellites. Every now and then, he'd speak into the air, not to anyone in particular, but to himself, running through calculations aloud, resetting figures, adjusting paths. Jessica stood in the doorway, unsure whether to interrupt. "They don't see it," Musk said finally, his back still to her. "To them it's just hardware. A billionaire playing with rockets and electric toys. But this," he tapped a control and zoomed in on a dense grid of satellite positions. "This is the nervous system of a future civilization. And they're trying to poison it before it matures." Jessica stepped inside. "Then stop them. You have the proof. We can take it to court, expose the board, turn the whole thing on its head." "It's not that simple," he replied. "If we go nuclear, we fracture the company. The technology stalls. They'll win by default." She frowned. "So what's your plan? Sit back and let them crush you?" He finally turned to face her. "I don't mind being crucified. I've done it before. I mind wasting time. Time is the only thing I can't make more of." Jessica studied him. For all his public bravado, the tweets, the headlines, the erratic interviews, this was someone who carried the weight of things much heavier than reputation. He wasn't afraid of losing control. He was afraid of losing momentum. "You built these systems to outlast you," she said carefully. "But right now, none of that matters if they strip you of credibility and send you to prison. The system will die in litigation hell." He didn't disagree. Instead, he sat down, pulled up a command interface, and entered a string of code. "This unlocks the Antler failover logs. You'll find a timestamp, 2 days before the indictment went public. That's when they ran the purge." Jessica leaned over the console. "So the board's sabotage started before the government filed?" "The government is being used," Musk said. "Leverage, incentives, bad data, all of it fed to them in a neat, believable story. Prosecutors hate complicated truth. They prefer clean lies." She watched as the logs poured across the screen. Error codes, access overrides, unscheduled firmware resets, clear signs that someone had triggered a deletion protocol across Tesla's internal systems. Except Antler had caught it. The system Musk had built in secret had recorded every keystroke. "This is our defense," Jessica said. "It's more than defense," he replied. "It's offense. But it has to be played right. If we show too much, too fast, we spook the wrong people. They'll bury the case before we can expose them." Jessica stepped back. "You sound more like a general than a CEO." Musk gave a tired smile. "I run companies like war campaigns. Otherwise, they die." Over the next 72 hours, Jessica worked in sync with him and a hand-picked internal team, engineers, legal techs, and 2 ex-CIA digital analysts Musk had on private retainer. Each of them operated under strict encryption, often speaking in codenames, using aliases in shared files. They mapped out what became known internally as the firewall protocol, a coordinated defense and counterattack strategy to reveal the manipulation without triggering internal collapse. The key was timing. They needed to let the prosecution make its strongest move, then counter with Antler logs, board communications, and, if necessary, Jessica's testimony about the planted data and faked whistleblower scripts. But there was a complication. Musk had been subpoenaed to give a pre-trial deposition. And the lead prosecutor was Jessica's ex-husband, Eric Vaughn. She hadn't seen him in over a year, not since their divorce had finalized with just 2 signatures and no words. But now, fate, or politics, had placed them on opposite sides of one of the most consequential legal battles in tech history. The deposition was scheduled in a private federal facility in San Jose, closed to press, but swarming with rumor. As Jessica sat in the waiting room outside the hearing chamber, she tried to steady her breathing. Musk was behind the glass wall, answering questions in his typically detached manner, half machine, half prophet. But when Eric leaned forward and asked, "Mr. Musk, have you ever authorized unauthorized surveillance on domestic communications networks?" Jessica saw it. A flicker. Not in Musk, but in Eric. A glance at the monitor. A hesitation. He already knew the answer. He wasn't asking to learn, he was asking to perform. Later that night, Musk called Jessica into a private room lined with touchscreen panels. "He's not just playing prosecutor," Musk said. "He's playing defense, for someone else." Jessica nodded. "Eric's always had ambition. I just didn't realize how deep it ran. He was approached by a consultancy firm last year, the same one Malik interned for. That firm's been linked to defense contracts and high-frequency trading groups. There's a line connecting them to Strauss." "Then let's pull it tight," Musk said. "If Vaughn's dirty, we don't just beat the case, we collapse their whole operation." Jessica wasn't sure if she was exhilarated or terrified. Her ex-husband was no saint, but to accuse a federal prosecutor of conspiracy was to light a fire in the middle of a storm. "We need more than theory," she warned. "We need hard data. Proof he's coordinating with outside interests. Otherwise, we look paranoid." Musk nodded and turned back to the console. "Then let's build the trap." Within a day, his team had deployed a fake internal memo, seeded into Tesla's sandbox environment, an environment they knew the compromised board member had access to. The memo was a bait document, suggesting that Musk had authorized offshore server wipes, a new angle the prosecution hadn't used yet. The idea was simple. The fake memo was titled Offshore Contingency Protocol Authorization, Level Red, written in the same tone and document structure as Tesla's internal compliance memos, with subtle technical markers that only a seasoned insider would recognize as bait. It detailed a fabricated plan in which Elon Musk supposedly authorized remote data purges from an offshore satellite data farm in Malta, including language that implied premeditation and guilt. Jessica helped refine the language, making sure it was just plausible enough to be taken seriously by someone with enough bias to believe it. Musk's team planted it inside the sandbox environment. A server partition with limited access, only reachable through a pathway that could be monitored end to end. They didn't have to wait long. Within 48 hours, the same language from the fake memo began appearing in the prosecution's proposed discovery motion, specifically in a section claiming that Musk may have directed offshore partners to eliminate key logs that could constitute evidence of intentional data suppression. Jessica stared at the language in the court filing with a rush of cold clarity. They took the bait. She immediately cross-referenced the submission timestamp with access logs from the Sandbox server. One user ID had accessed the file within hours of its creation, board_OPC_7. The alias corresponded to a senior board member, Owen Pierce Caldwell, a longtime investor and early Tesla supporter who had once publicly defended Musk but had gone silent during the indictment storm. "We have him," she whispered. She forwarded the file trail to Musk. He responded with only 2 words, "Time launch." The firewall protocol was officially activated. Jessica convened with Musk and the hand-picked team in a secure underground control room beneath the Fremont facility. The plan was audacious. They would wait until the prosecution made its next court appearance to formally introduce the offshore purge theory. At that precise moment, Jessica would move to admit the original Antler logs showing fabricated breach attempts, along with the Sandbox metadata proving the prosecution's case was built on falsified evidence supplied by compromised board members. The brilliance of the trap was not just in proving misconduct, it was in the timing. By showing that the government had filed motions based on a fake memo planted for that very purpose, Musk's team could argue selective prosecution, conspiracy to mislead the court, and possibly even malicious abuse of process. But the risks were enormous. If the judge didn't believe the bait was planted intentionally, or if the metadata chain broke at any point, it could be dismissed as a stunt. Worse, it could backfire and be construed as an obstruction attempt. Jessica knew they were walking a knife's edge. The day of the hearing arrived with overcast skies and tightened security. News vans parked outside the courthouse like vultures circling an injured animal, waiting for blood. Inside, the tension was palpable. The prosecution entered confidently, with Eric Vaughn carrying a thick binder and an expression of measured arrogance. Jessica sat beside Musk, her expression unreadable, heart pounding. "All rise," the court clerk called as Judge Miriam Sloan entered the chamber. Known for her clinical logic and razor-sharp courtroom demeanor, Sloan had presided over high-profile tech cases for years. She had little tolerance for grandstanding, and even less for games. Vaughn opened strong, stating that new information obtained by a confidential source indicates that the defendant may have coordinated a secondary offshore data purge in an effort to obscure the full scope of operational misconduct. The courtroom buzzed. Reporters scribbled notes. Judge Sloan raised a brow. "Do you have corroborating evidence of this alleged purge?" Vaughn nodded and referenced the language from the fake memo almost verbatim. Jessica stood slowly. "Your Honor, we request to address the court immediately with critical information regarding the foundation of the government's claim." Sloan looked at her. "You may proceed." Jessica took a deep breath. The document cited by the prosecution was not part of any official record or authorized correspondence. It was a bait document, created and deployed in a restricted sandbox environment to identify the source of repeated internal leaks and determine whether falsified evidence was being introduced into this case. The metadata trail proves that a compromised party accessed the bait file, and that language from it was subsequently used by the government in this motion. She paused, then handed a sealed evidence packet to the clerk. "We are submitting Exhibit X, a full access log of the sandbox environment, including time-stamped entries and unique session identifiers, which clearly show that board member Owen Pierce Caldwell accessed the bait file and subsequently transmitted its contents to an external party. Furthermore, we are submitting Antler system logs, authenticated by a third-party forensic auditor, that demonstrate no such data purge was ever executed, nor authorized, by Mr. Musk or any of his agents." The judge reviewed the packet silently. Vaughn's face remained expressionless, but Jessica could see it in his posture, stiffness, tension, the micro-adjustments of a man cornered. Judge Sloan leaned back. So you are suggesting that the court has been misled with falsified evidence? Jessica nodded. Yes, Your Honor. And we intend to subpoena all related communications between Mr. Caldwell and any external party connected to this prosecution. We also intend to request an evidentiary hearing to determine how this false narrative was allowed to enter the government's filings. The courtroom exploded in whispers. Vaughn rose. This is absurd. They created a fake document, then claim we were duped into citing it. No, Jessica replied, her voice sharp. We didn't create a fake document. We created a net, and you walked straight into it. Judge Sloan held up her hand. Enough. I will recess for 1 hour to review the submission and determine whether further hearings are warranted. As the gavel struck, Vaughn turned to Jessica. What the hell do you think you're doing? She didn't blink. My job. And maybe it's time you started asking why you stopped doing yours. Back in the prep room, Musk looked at her and offered a rare, fleeting grin. That, he said, was beautiful. It's not over, she replied. They'll try to regroup. Vaughn's smart, and Strauss is probably working a dozen angles we haven't even seen yet. Let them, Musk said. Every time they step forward now, they risk stepping into another trap. And eventually, they'll run out of clean moves. That night, Jessica returned to her temporary apartment in San Francisco, mentally and emotionally drained. She had spent the last 10 days living off caffeine, adrenaline, and instinct. She stared out the window, watching fog roll over the city like a slow-moving tide. Her phone buzzed. It was a text, from an unknown number. They're coming after the antler logs next. Be ready. Amamar Martin Strauss. It was the first time he'd contacted her directly. She stared at the message, pulse quickening. He knew. He was still watching. She immediately backed up all logs to 3 separate off-site encrypted servers and initiated a trace on the text. It was routed through a mesh of dark web proxies, ultimately dead-ending in Switzerland. No trail. Just a ghost sending warnings. Jessica knew what it meant. Strauss wasn't running. He was playing the long game. The next attack wouldn't come in the courtroom, it would come through channels she couldn't see, decisions made in silence, by people who never appeared on official documents. But she wasn't backing down. She had chosen this war. And now the enemy knew she was a threat. 3 days after the courtroom ambush, the temperature around the case shifted, not publicly, not yet, but within the sealed corridors of legal negotiation and quiet political favor trading, something had cracked. Jessica felt it first in the tone of Vaughn's filings, which became oddly cautious, laced with language designed to protect rather than attack. Then came the unusual meeting request from the Department of Justice, not through a subpoena or formal deposition notice, but through a private intermediary connected to Musk's personal legal counsel. The message was clear, someone high up wanted to talk. No cameras, no record, just a conversation. Jessica and Musk met with the intermediary in a nondescript building in Palo Alto used for investor negotiations and IP transfers. It was a place where silence came with a signature. The man who greeted them introduced himself only as Tom, dressed in a tailored charcoal suit with no obvious government badge, but his diction was pure DC. Polished, vague, dangerous. Mr. Musk, Ms. Cole, he said, you've stirred quite the response. Some of it predictable, some of it, less so. There are people who now believe this case is more about politics than justice. That complicates things. Musk didn't respond. He simply stared, a look of perpetual calculation in his eyes. Jessica spoke. So why are we here? What do you want? Tom offered a tight smile. I'm here to offer an opportunity. A détente. If you're willing to make certain assurances, about future operational transparency, external compliance audits, and perhaps a minor leadership restructuring, we may be able to recommend a reduced or redirected course of action regarding the indictment. Jessica bristled. "You're asking him to step down." "I'm asking," Tom said smoothly, "for a gesture. Something symbolic, not necessarily permanent. A board reassignment, perhaps. Or a pledge to limit direct technical oversight. Just enough to assure certain stakeholders that the system is bigger than the man." Musk finally spoke. "If the system needs to be protected from me, it's already broken. And if I agree to your deal, what stops them from coming again in 6 months with a different excuse?" Tom's expression didn't change. "This isn't a threat. It's a window. The media's narrative is shifting. If we close this quietly, you walk. If we fight this to the end, well, sometimes winning in court costs more than losing in principle." Jessica leaned forward. "Let me be very clear. We have proof of internal board collusion, falsified evidence, and prosecutorial bias. If you're offering a backdoor deal, it means someone is scared we'll burn the whole thing down." Tom paused. "Ms. Cole, you're not wrong. But there are multiple agendas at play here. You may win this battle and lose something else down the road. Think about that before you decide whether to light the fuse." As they left the building, Musk said nothing for several minutes. Jessica broke the silence. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking we've reached the part of the movie where the villain tries to negotiate before the final act," he said. "Which means we're closer to checkmate than they realize." That night, Jessica received another anonymous message. This one wasn't a warning. It was a file, a heavily redacted internal memo from a private defense contractor that had partnered with the government for AI risk assessments. The memo referenced Tesla's AI division specifically, including its proprietary neural feedback loop technology and a project codenamed Hermes. Jessica hadn't seen this code name before. She ran it through Musk's internal project archive and found it buried deep under an experimental research branch, Hermes, Heuristic Emergent Response Management and Ethical Simulation. It was an AI framework designed not just to respond to external stimuli, but to learn ethical behavior patterns through observed human responses. The implications were massive. If real, it meant Tesla had developed an AI system capable of not just simulating morality, but adapting its own ethical logic over time. This was decades ahead of what other firms claimed to be doing. And it explained why the government, or certain factions within it, might want Musk sidelined. Whoever controlled Hermes wouldn't just control smart cars or satellites, they'd control the framework for decision-making at the machine level. That was more powerful than data. It was the beginning of machine ethics. Jessica brought the memo to Musk. He reviewed it silently. "I didn't authorize this to leave internal servers," he said. "Someone sold it. Probably Strauss. Why didn't you ever talk about this publicly?" "Because the world's not ready," Musk said. "And because the moment it's real, it becomes the most valuable, and most dangerous, asset in tech history." Jessica sat back. "This is what they're afraid of. Not you. Not the tweets. This. A future where AI doesn't need a human conscience to behave ethically, it learns it on its own." "Exactly," Musk said. "And if I'm removed, they either bury it or re-engineer it without the constraints we built into it. Then it's just another tool for manipulation." They knew then what had to happen. The courtroom battle wasn't about clearing Musk's name anymore, it was about protecting Hermes. If that system was taken, no amount of legal vindication would matter. Jessica began building a new defense strategy, one that included introducing Hermes into the court record, not in full, but enough to show its existence, to make it part of the case so that any effort to hide or suppress it would be considered obstruction. Musk approved. "If they want a war," he said, "let's give them one they'll regret starting." The next court session was scheduled for a procedural review. But Jessica motioned for an emergency evidentiary hearing instead. The request alone sparked a media frenzy. What could Musk's team possibly have now? Vaughn filed a rebuttal, arguing the motion was a distraction. Judge Sloan granted the hearing. In the packed courtroom, Jessica stood and began. Your Honor, new evidence has emerged that directly affects the scope and motivation behind the charges filed against Mr. Musk. We intend to show that proprietary Tesla AI research was obtained, leaked, and misrepresented to regulatory entities by individuals with financial interests in redirecting its development outside of Mr. Musk's oversight. Specifically, we refer to Project Hermes. The room went silent. Even Vaughn didn't hide his surprise. Judge Sloan narrowed her eyes. Proceed carefully, Ms. Cole. Jessica continued. We have metadata showing unauthorized access to Tesla's internal AI ethics lab. We have external communications between board-level personnel and third-party defense contractors. And we have confirmation that this technology, if extracted from Tesla oversight, poses risks far beyond market competition. She paused. This isn't just a legal matter, Your Honor. It's a national security matter. And we believe it's been weaponized to engineer the removal of Mr. Musk from his position. Vaughn rose, visibly agitated. Objection. They're turning this courtroom into a stage for conspiracy fiction. None of this has been vetted. Judge Sloan held up a hand. Objection noted. But I will review the materials in camera. If even a fraction of this is verifiable, it will affect every motion we've reviewed to date. As court adjourned, Jessica felt the shift again, not a victory, not yet, but a disruption in the momentum. The prosecution had moved from attacker to defender. And somewhere in the shadows, Strauss would be watching, calculating his next move. That night, another message arrived. A single sentence. You should have taken the deal. Now we go to phase 2. Jessica read it, deleted it, and backed up everything again. Whatever phase 2 was, she was ready. The fuse was lit. The message was short but loud in its implications. You should have taken the deal. Now we go to phase 2. Jessica stared at the words on her encrypted terminal for a long time, rereading them, not out of confusion but to absorb the weight behind them. This wasn't posturing. Whoever sent it wasn't bluffing. This wasn't someone warning her, it was someone informing her. Musk was in his private AI lab when she arrived at 3:20 a.m., eyes locked on multiple screens filled with moving neural maps and cascading lines of synthetic decision matrices. Hermes was running in an isolated simulation, analyzing human moral dilemmas scraped from thousands of hours of courtroom transcripts, philosophy lectures, and real-world ethics test cases. Jessica waited until the data feed paused. They're moving to phase 2. Musk didn't look surprised. They always were. Phase 1 was destabilization. This is isolation. She nodded. They won't just discredit you. They'll try to cut off your access. Communication, funding, control points inside the company. I expect a financial hit, a media blitz, and maybe even criminal escalation. If we're right about Strauss, he's going to open a second front while Vaughn stalls in court. Musk turned to a separate console and ran a script. 3 accounts began to show unusual trading activity, shares in companies he didn't officially control, but had influence over through third-party holdings and venture shell structures. Someone was initiating sell-offs that would appear normal to an outsider but were clearly coordinated moves designed to drain liquidity. They're targeting my reserves, he said. By tomorrow, the media will say I'm being abandoned by key investors. The stock will take a hit. Confidence will drop. The board will push for an emergency vote of no confidence. How long do we have? Jessica asked. Hours, he replied. Maybe less. We need to get ahead of it. Jessica contacted their secure media team and began crafting a preemptive strike, an internal leak from a whistleblower close to the board, exposing the coordinated attempt to sabotage Musk's financial base while suppressing the Hermes data. The goal wasn't to stop the attack, but to reframe it, to make it clear that this wasn't Musk falling apart, but enemies trying to silence a disruptive force. By dawn, the story had broken through alternative media channels, spreading across forums, decentralized news platforms, and even making the trending bar on X. Anonymous Tesla insider claims AI ethics breakthrough targeted by private defense contractors, the headlines read. Vaughn's office issued a denial within 2 hours, but it didn't matter. The narrative was shifting again, and this time Musk wasn't the story, Hermes was. By midday, Jessica received a call from a trusted journalist at one of the nation's most respected technology publications. "We've got confirmation from a second source," she said. "Someone who worked on Hermes 2 years ago under a non-disclosure agreement. They say the tech's real, and it terrified everyone who saw it." "Print it," Jessica said. "But don't say it came from us." Meanwhile, in court, Vaughn was unraveling. The judge had scheduled a follow-up hearing on the Antler logs and the prosecution's use of potentially tainted evidence. Jessica arrived early to find Vaughn already pacing the chamber, visibly flustered, sweat blooming under his collar. She approached calmly. "You could walk away from this, Eric. All it takes is telling the truth." He sneered. "I didn't bury myself in this for some revenge story. I came here to win." "And what did you win?" she asked. "Strauss's approval. A spot in some future administration. You think they'll protect you when this goes down?" "I think," he said, "you've already lost. You just don't know it yet." Judge Sloan entered and called the court to order. Jessica presented new evidence, digital communication logs showing coordination between board members and entities tied to defense think tanks and lobbying groups, entities now under scrutiny by independent investigative journalists. Vaughn objected, but his arguments landed flat. The judge was beginning to see the larger picture, and her questions grew more pointed. "Mr. Vaughn," she said, "are you prepared to affirm that all evidence submitted by your office was obtained independently, without influence from parties with financial or political interest in the outcome of this case?" Vaughn paused. "To the best of my knowledge, yes." "That's not a direct answer," the judge replied. "If we uncover evidence that contradicts that statement, the consequences for this office will be severe." Outside the courthouse, news cameras were back. Jessica gave a brief statement, avoiding legal detail but reinforcing the truth. This case isn't about ego or empire. It's about control of future technologies and who gets to shape their ethics. We're not backing down. Back inside Tesla HQ, the next assault began, this time in cyberspace. At 2:14 p.m., Antler flagged a surge in external probes against the Hermes subnet. Someone was trying to breach the isolation wall around the AI research clusters. Musk's security team locked down all external IP access, then activated a honeypot protocol, a fake data environment designed to attract intruders and track their methods. Within minutes, 3 nodes were pinged from foreign servers, all routed through VPNs originating from Langley, Virginia. Jessica's heart dropped. "They're using government resources to probe private infrastructure." "Not officially," Musk replied. "Which means we have to treat it like a rogue op." The honeypot was a trap, of course. Inside it was a fake Hermes module program to trigger a trace. When the intruders downloaded the dummy files, the embedded code relayed a silent ping back through their VPN layers, giving Musk's team enough metadata to identify the relay endpoints. "We just watched an illegal cyber op unfold in real time," Jessica said. "And we caught them." Musk didn't look satisfied. "Now comes the hard part, proving it without exposing our own security methods." Jessica understood. If they made the evidence public, it would force a larger confrontation, one that could escalate far beyond legal boundaries. But if they sat on it, the attacks would continue, bolder each time. That night, Jessica received a private message from an old colleague at the Electronic Frontier Foundation. "We're hearing chatter about a closed-door vote to fast-track federal oversight of AI platforms, possibly targeting you-know-who. You need to prepare." "How do you know this?" Jessica asked. "Someone on the inside doesn't want this to happen. Not everyone in D.C. is on board with what's coming." The pieces were converging. The courtroom. The board. The media. The intelligence community. All around one axis, Hermes. Jessica looked at Musk. We need to take this to the public. Not a leak. Not a headline. A full-on presentation. Controlled. Transparent. If they're going to vilify you, let's show them why you matter. Musk agreed. We live-streamed the simulation. Let the world see what Hermes can do. Let them decide if it should be locked away or guided into the light. Within 24 hours, they were ready. A live broadcast was announced, no PR spin, no pre-briefing. Just raw demonstration. They framed it around one question: can an AI learn morality, not by command, but by observation? The stream went live at 8 p.m. Pacific. Millions watched as Hermes analyzed complex ethical scenarios, battlefield decisions, autonomous driving dilemmas, economic redistribution models. It narrated its choices, adjusted them in real time, and explained its reasoning using human analogies. It wasn't perfect, but it was astonishing. The response was immediate and electric. Public sentiment shifted again. What had been seen as reckless ambition now looked like visionary stewardship. Musk didn't speak until the end of the broadcast. He looked directly into the camera. You don't have to trust me. But don't let fear bury progress. What we've built here isn't dangerous because it thinks, it's dangerous because some people would rather it didn't. And then, he said the line that would go viral by morning: you can't regulate the future into silence. The Hermes live stream shattered records. Within 12 hours it had been viewed over 86 million times across multiple platforms, translated into 29 languages, dissected by ethicists, engineers, pundits, and politicians alike. But the most powerful effect wasn't in the numbers, it was in the shift of public perception. Elon Musk wasn't just a tech mogul on trial anymore. He was now the architect of an AI that had stunned the world with its ability to simulate moral reasoning. And that made certain people very, very nervous. Jessica knew what was coming before it happened. The first signs emerged in market behavior, subtle movements designed to undermine confidence in Tesla's leadership. Share prices dipped not because of earnings or product failures but because of sudden, expert, opinion pieces flooding financial media claiming that Musk's AI ambitions represented an unquantifiable liability. Terms like rogue technology risk and moral hazard amplification began appearing in strategic outlets, all pushing the same message: remove Musk or risk collapse. At the same time, a fresh wave of subpoenas landed on Jessica's desk. Requests for documentation that had already been provided, along with bizarre new inquiries targeting Musk's unrelated ventures, from SpaceX to Neuralink. The obvious goal was to overwhelm, to distract, to choke them in bureaucracy. But the most insidious attack came not from government officials or hostile journalists, but from within. Board member Owen Pierce Caldwell resurfaced after weeks of silence with a carefully choreographed media appearance on a primetime talk show, presenting himself as a disillusioned insider concerned about the direction of Tesla's leadership. I was one of Elon's biggest supporters, he told the host with an expression of grave sincerity. But at some point, vision has to be balanced with accountability. We've crossed that line. Jessica watched the interview from Musk's office, fury simmering just beneath the surface. She knew Caldwell was complicit. He had been the one who accessed the planted memo. The one who had likely shared Hermes data with defense contractors. But now, here he was, recasting himself as the ethical whistleblower. He's angling for the chairmanship, she said flatly. They're preparing a board vote. They want you out. Musk didn't look away from the screen. Let them vote. Let them show their hand. Within 48 hours, the board announced an emergency meeting to review Musk's fitness to serve as acting CEO pending the resolution of legal proceedings. The official reason cited ongoing litigation, regulatory exposure, and reputational volatility. In other words, they were using the noise to trigger a coup. Jessica immediately launched a procedural review to delay the vote, citing pending federal investigations into internal board leaks and misconduct. It bought them 72 hours. Time enough to launch a counteroffensive. While the board maneuvered in the shadows, Jessica worked with Musk's AI and legal teams to prepare a bombshell disclosure, an internal report showing that key board members, including Caldwell, had held undisclosed financial interests in firms lobbying for federal AI regulation and that these same firms had invested heavily in competitor companies who stood to benefit from Musk's removal. It wasn't just a conflict of interest, it was a financial ambush masquerading as governance. They timed the release perfectly. 1 hour before the board vote, the report was published anonymously through a secure data leak to trusted journalists, along with signed affidavits from internal auditors and metadata linking Caldwell's communications to external stakeholders. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Several board members distanced themselves from the vote. Caldwell canceled his scheduled post-meeting press conference. Tesla's stock, which had dipped nearly 11% over the previous week, began to rebound within hours. Jessica stood with Musk in the executive suite as the news broke. "They won't recover from this," she said. "Even if they try to deny it, the metadata's too clean. It's over." Musk nodded slowly. "Not yet. They're cornered. And cornered people do reckless things." He was right. That night, Vaughn's office filed a motion requesting Musk's immediate detainment pending the outcome of trial, citing active manipulation of internal data systems and interference with an ongoing federal investigation. The request was outlandish, legally thin, procedurally desperate, but it didn't matter. The motion itself would be enough to trigger headlines. DOJ seeks to detain Musk. That was the headline the machine needed. And the next morning, it was everywhere. Jessica was furious. "They're turning a procedural stunt into a conviction by public opinion. That's all they have left," Musk said. "If they had the truth, they wouldn't need the theater." They rushed to file a countermotion, backed with sworn affidavits from independent cybersecurity experts attesting to the integrity of the Antler logs and Hermes access systems. But the damage was already done. The narrative war had reached its climax. Every news channel was now covering the story around the clock. It was no longer about data, evidence, or law. It was about survival. And that's when the leak came. An anonymous whistleblower submitted a classified internal document to a major investigative outlet, one showing that Hermes had been placed on a priority acquisition list by a joint task force of military and intelligence officials under the justification of ethical containment protocol. The document revealed what Jessica had feared all along: there was never any intent to prosecute Musk based solely on criminal conduct. The goal had always been to isolate him from Hermes, discredit him, and reassign the project under federal oversight. Now it was in writing. Now the world could see it. The news broke like a thunderclap. Government targeted Musk's AI for seizure, not just prosecution, the headline read. The public backlash was fierce. Protests erupted online and in real life, tech workers, ethicists, futurists, and privacy advocates condemning the idea that any single government body should have the right to seize control of an emergent ethical intelligence. Within 48 hours, Judge Sloan called an emergency hearing. Jessica stood before her, calm and ready. "Your Honor, we submit this latest development not merely as a legal issue, but as a constitutional one. We are witnessing a coordinated effort to dismantle private innovation through manipulation of the judicial process. This court must take a stand." Vaughn tried to argue relevance, but the judge cut him off. "Mr. Vaughn, I have reviewed the leak. I have reviewed your filings. And I see no credible path forward that does not demand full transparency. I am ordering an evidentiary review of all federal actions taken against Mr. Musk since the original indictment." Silence fell over the chamber. This was it. The beginning of the unraveling. Outside the courtroom, reporters swarmed Jessica for comment. "What's next?" one shouted. She answered with steady confidence. "What's next is accountability. Not just for Elon Musk. but for everyone who tried to break the rules to bring him down. Back at Tesla HQ, Musk was watching the live stream of the courthouse steps, his expression unreadable. Jessica walked in and handed him a printed copy of the leaked document. "They tried to erase you," she said. "But now everyone knows why." Musk folded the paper slowly. "Let them come. This isn't just about me anymore." And he was right. The story had changed. The courtroom was no longer just a battleground. It was a spotlight. And everything hidden in the dark was now being dragged into the light. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The day after Judge Sloan ordered the evidentiary review, the pressure inside federal agencies reached a boiling point. Internal dissent spread like wildfire. Anonymous sources from within the DOJ, the SEC, and even the Office of Science and Technology Policy began leaking fragments of communications, memos, and internal debates that had never been intended for the public. Many of them confirmed what Jessica and Elon had long suspected: the prosecution wasn't just about legal boundaries, it was about bureaucratic containment, control, and the fear of Musk's refusal to obey unspoken rules. Hermes had ignited a fear greater than anything Musk had created before, not because it was unstable or dangerous, but because it worked too well and too independently. The AI's moral logic systems were now seen by some in government not as a marvel but as a threat to their monopoly on decision-making. And somewhere in that shadowy ecosystem of control and compliance, someone flipped. That's how it always starts: someone on the inside sees too much, hears the wrong directive, watches one too many backroom deals unfold, and finally breaks. The email came in the middle of the night to Jessica's secure legal channel. It was from an unnamed federal staffer. No signature. No title. But the content was explosive. Attached were internal communications between high-level DOJ attorneys and outside private sector figures, including former board member Owen Caldwell and a policy strategist linked to Strauss. The messages showed real-time coordination over court strategy, media narratives, and most damning of all, a draft memo laying out a contingency plan to seize Hermes under national emergency statutes in the event Musk was acquitted. Jessica stared at the memo, stunned. It wasn't theoretical anymore. They had a script for the next phase. Even if Musk won the trial, the system would find another way to isolate him and take control of his technology. "They were never going to let you win," she told Elon that morning. He read the documents without a word, his jaw tightening as he scrolled through each thread. "They're going to use the verdict as a public pivot point," he said finally. "Acquittal triggers intervention. Conviction buries everything. Either way, they win unless we expose it first." Jessica knew what had to happen. They couldn't just win in court anymore. They had to dismantle the entire apparatus built to remove Musk and claim Hermes. The battlefield had expanded again, from courtroom to boardroom, and now, to the heart of the government's legal machinery. Jessica reached out to Senator Lee Duncan, a known privacy hawk and longtime critic of unchecked federal surveillance powers. Duncan was skeptical at first. Politicians often were when approached by people linked to major controversies, but once her office saw the files, everything changed. "This isn't just overreach," Duncan said. "It's institutional sabotage disguised as national security." Within 24 hours, Duncan held a press conference. She called for an emergency oversight hearing to investigate potential abuse of federal prosecutorial power in the Musk case. That same day, 3 other lawmakers joined her. Suddenly, the story wasn't just about Elon Musk. It was about the integrity of the legal system itself. Vaughn's office went into damage control mode, denying involvement, issuing statements that sounded increasingly hollow. Meanwhile, Strauss vanished from public view: no tweets, no interviews, no comments. His silence was deafening. But the real shift came when the first internal DOJ resignation was announced. Assistant U.S. Attorney Carla Neiman stepped down, citing irreconcilable conflicts with the direction of the case. That alone would have been newsworthy. But she didn't stop there. In a letter published through a public interest law journal, Neiman confirmed what Jessica already knew: the prosecution's original case had been compromised by external influence, and she could no longer serve under directives that bypassed due process. "The truth," she wrote, "is being managed, not pursued." The effect was like an earthquake. In a single afternoon, public trust in the prosecution plummeted. Vaughn's name trended for all the wrong reasons. Musk's approval ratings skyrocketed, not just among his fans, but among moderate observers who were beginning to see him not as a rebel without rules, but as a man fighting for a principle bigger than himself. But the system wasn't going to back off quietly. That same evening, the FBI arrived at one of Musk's satellite offices in Houston with a sealed warrant for electronic records tied to the Hermes infrastructure. They claimed it was a parallel investigation unrelated to the trial. But Jessica wasn't fooled. It was pressure. Retaliation disguised as routine. She immediately filed for an emergency injunction, and the court granted a temporary hold on data seizure until a federal magistrate could review the warrant. Still, the message had been sent. "They're going to come at us from every angle now," she told Elon. "If we're going to survive this, we need to hit them where they don't expect it." Musk already had an idea. "Let's go to the engineers," he said. "The people who actually understand what Hermes is. Not politicians. Not lawyers. The technical truth will dismantle the political lie." Jessica set up a closed-door forum, inviting respected AI researchers from MIT, Stanford, DeepMind, and OpenAI, people with reputations strong enough to speak without fear of career destruction. Over 2 days, they were shown Hermes's decision tree simulations, its adaptation logs, and its ethical feedback loops. One by one, the scientists reached the same conclusion: Hermes wasn't just another algorithm. It was a legitimate step toward ethical AI. And the effort to bury it wasn't about public safety, it was about control. Several of the researchers agreed to testify. Their credentials would make it nearly impossible to dismiss their findings as biased. Jessica scheduled depositions and submitted expert witness lists to the court. Vaughn, now visibly unraveling, tried to suppress the list, but Judge Sloan overruled him. "If the prosecution objects to scientific testimony," she said, "then perhaps they should reconsider whether they're in the right courtroom." The final blow came when Caldwell's encrypted messages were decrypted. Elon's internal security team had, quietly and legally, obtained the missing keys through a third-party source and submitted them to Jessica for review. The messages revealed conversations with Strauss going back months, including discussions of board manipulation, media seeding, and direct communications with Vaughn's office. It was the smoking gun. Jessica brought the evidence to Judge Sloan under seal. The judge reviewed the files, then recessed the court for 2 days. When they returned, the judge delivered a thunderous rebuke from the bench. "This court has seen compelling evidence of coordinated attempts to influence legal proceedings for personal and political gain," she said. "This is not justice. This is subversion." Vaughn's face turned ashen. He tried to respond, but the judge silenced him with a single look. "I am ordering a full evidentiary hearing to determine whether this case should proceed at all. Until then, all motions for punitive action against Mr. Musk are suspended." Jessica stepped outside the courthouse into a wall of flashing lights and microphones. This time, she didn't avoid the press. "We have said from the beginning that this case wasn't about justice, it was about control. Today, the court took the first step toward restoring both." Back inside Tesla HQ, Musk received the news with a simple nod. "So," he said, "the system blinked first." "It did," Jessica replied. "But the real question is, what will it do next?" "Prepare for the backlash," Musk said. "They don't retreat. They regroup." And as they stared out over the city skyline, both of them understood something deeper. This wasn't the end. This was the moment everything started to collapse, or change. The courtroom was no longer the battlefield. It had become the mirror. And the system could no longer look into it without seeing its own reflection. The 2-day recess imposed by Judge Sloan created an eerie calm, but Jessica knew better than to relax. The storm wasn't over, it had merely shifted direction. The courtroom had become too hot for Vaughn and his backers, too public, too unpredictable, and so the next move wouldn't be legal. It would be strategic, ruthless, and designed to bypass the slow gears of justice. The morning of the second day, a convoy of black SUVs pulled into a private hangar in Nevada where a military-adjacent contractor operated what was officially described as a data compliance research center. Unofficially, it was where sensitive technologies went when public seizure wasn't politically viable. Inside that facility, technicians were preparing digital infrastructure that, by all appearances, was designed to interface with a system modeled on the core of Hermes. Jessica received a tip from a defense analyst embedded inside one of the watchdog organizations that monitored federal contracts. The email was brief: "They're cloning it. Probably using stolen architecture. We don't know how close they are, but it's not hypothetical anymore." She immediately confronted Musk, who stood by the massive glass panels of his office overlooking the Palo Alto campus. He absorbed the news with a calm intensity that made her skin tighten. "They're making a counterfeit," he said. "Not just to replace it. To control the story. If they can roll out a version of Hermes under federal oversight, they'll say mine was always unstable, always dangerous. Then we need to prove the difference," Jessica said. "You created something that responds to moral complexity. If theirs doesn't, it will collapse under real scrutiny. Assuming we get to scrutinize it before it's locked behind security clearance," Musk replied. "We need to flush it into daylight." Jessica called in favors from 3 high-profile data rights organizations and arranged a joint statement signed by dozens of influential academics, scientists, and civil liberties attorneys. The statement demanded any AI developed using partial or full Hermes architecture be made subject to public and independent ethical review. Within 12 hours, it made headlines. Global tech leaders warn of government AI clone without oversight. Public pressure mounted again, but the federal agencies behind the effort remained silent. Musk's name was now unavoidable. On every major platform, every Talking Heads analysis segment, every podcast debating the future of artificial intelligence and human ethics. He had become the central axis of the conversation, and the more the government tried to control it, the more the people paid attention. But Strauss, still unseen, was undoubtedly still pulling strings. Jessica suspected he was engineering a way to discredit the court entirely, to create such a massive disruption in public trust that any ruling, even one favorable to Musk, would lose its impact. The warning came from an unexpected source. Former Tesla engineer Alan Zhou, who had vanished months earlier under suspicious circumstances, suddenly reappeared via a secured line routed through 3 countries. His face appeared on Jessica's screen, gaunt but focused. "I've seen the code," he said without preamble. "They copied everything up to version 1.83. But they stripped out the recursion limiter and the empathy feedback loop. It's not Hermes. It's a shell." Jessica felt a cold rush spread through her spine. "You're saying it's immoral?" "I'm saying it can make decisions," Zhou said, "but it doesn't care about outcomes. It optimizes for solution efficiency, not human impact. In wartime, that's a weapon." Zhou then dropped the final bombshell. "They're going to field test it in a defense sim and leak the footage as proof that your version is flawed. They want to compare them side by side, but their version will have no conscience. And when that happens, people will panic. They'll say no AI is safe. And then the call to nationalize everything will sound like wisdom." Musk was already in motion. Within hours, he authorized the creation of a public transparency platform where every major Hermes update, logs, ethics training sets, simulation records, would be made available to verified third parties. "If they want to clone us in the dark," he said, "we'll flood the world with light." The Hermes Transparency Initiative launched with massive support. Top universities volunteered ethics teams. Decentralized groups of programmers began forming distributed audit chains to validate the logs. It was chaos, but it was a weaponized form of chaos, a counterweight to secrecy. And just in time. That weekend, a leaked video surfaced online showing a military sim where a drone swarm, guided by an unnamed AI system, neutralized a village housing suspected hostiles. The footage was grainy, the metadata scrubbed, but the tactics were too close to a Hermes-based architecture to be coincidence. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. No warnings had been issued. The AI had classified every human in proximity as a potential risk based on probabilistic threat models. Within minutes, the footage went viral. Hashtags like #AI_warcrime and #EthicsMatters trended worldwide. The backlash was immediate and seismic. When Jessica reviewed the code signatures embedded in the video, her blood froze. One string matched a known identifier from Hermes 1.83, evidence that this was indeed a stripped clone. "They're testing a conscience-less version of your system in live fire," she told Elon. "And they were going to blame you when it went wrong." Elon responded by scheduling another live stream, this one featuring Hermes running the exact same scenario with its original ethics module intact. The difference was staggering. Hermes chose containment over elimination, non-lethal suppression over full engagement. It simulated human contact protocols. It adapted to humanitarian corridors. And most importantly, it identified a critical piece of data the clone had missed, a child's voice echoing through a comm link, proving that non-combatants were present. The live stream stunned the world again. "This," Musk said to the camera, "is what happens when you remove morality from power." That moment became one of the most watched online broadcasts in modern history. It not only cleared Musk of suspicion, it began a broader discussion that no one in power had wanted: should AI development be allowed to exist outside public moral scrutiny? Jessica received confirmation that Senator Duncan's oversight hearing would now include military AI ethics, not just the Musk case. Vaughn, now politically radioactive, had lost the support of several DOJ officials. There were whispers of a replacement. Behind closed doors, even some of Musk's fiercest critics began to relent. "We still think he's reckless," one official admitted off the record, "but he's not wrong." Strauss, however, was not done. Jessica received an untraceable voice message late one night, distorted but unmistakable in tone. "You think the world runs on virtue. It runs on leverage. We built the system because people like Musk can't be trusted to decide where the future goes." She didn't reply. She didn't need to. The world had already begun replying for her. The public had seen the fork in the road, one path with transparency, messy and exposed but ethical. The other, hidden behind agencies and flags, optimizing for control, not conscience. And they had chosen. The courtroom wasn't empty yet, but it was clear that the battle had moved. The system had struck first. Now Musk and Jessica had struck back. It was about something far more dangerous to the system: truth. And truth, once exposed, doesn't go quietly back into the dark. The morning the whistleblower came forward, the world stood still. No headlines, no press release, no advanced notice. Just a live-streamed video uploaded simultaneously to 3 independent platforms and verified by a global chain of cybersecurity experts within minutes of its appearance. The speaker appeared seated in a dimly lit room, partially backlit by a window that let in only streaks of soft, early light. Her voice was clear, measured, and unwavering. "My name is Ava Talbot. I was an ethics consultant hired to advise on the development of the AI clone derived from Elon Musk's original Hermes system. I am coming forward today because what we built, and how it was used, violates every principle of human-centered technology I've ever believed in." Jessica watched the footage from her office, heart pounding. The name Ava Talbot had never surfaced before, not in any document, deposition, or leak. She was a ghost in the system, someone who had slipped through the cracks, or been buried. I was brought into the project under a classified designation, Talbot continued. They told me we were developing a parallel system for defensive simulations, and that my job was to ensure the system could comply with basic ethical protocols. But the system had already been altered. The core empathy module was removed. The machine could simulate understanding, but it couldn't feel consequence. It optimized purely on efficiency, regardless of human outcomes. The video ran for 27 minutes, each moment more damning than the last. Talbot revealed a timeline of decisions, how the clone had been fast-tracked through DoD review channels, how its developers were instructed to bypass traditional red team audits, how test results showing fatal simulations were intentionally buried. But the real detonator came at minute 21. This is a copy of an internal memo from a senior legal advisor embedded in the project. The memo outlines a post-trial scenario in which, regardless of Elon Musk's exoneration or conviction, the Hermes clone would be used as justification for stripping all advanced AI development away from private sector entities under an emergency declaration. The document, displayed clearly on the screen, carried signatures, dates, and attached directives. It wasn't speculation. It was a playbook. Jessica's phone lit up with texts and alerts from journalists, senators, international observers. This wasn't just a leak. It was a seismic shift. The court, the government, the entire framework of the case had now been exposed as part of a broader plan to reclaim AI from what officials called unregulated innovators, but what the public increasingly saw as visionaries being punished for thinking too far ahead. Vaughn issued a rushed statement disavowing the memo's relevance, calling Talbot a fringe contributor with limited access, but no one bought it. By noon, her video had been seen by 200 million people across the world. International human rights organizations called for a halt to all military AI simulations using unverified ethics modules. Senator Duncan reconvened her oversight hearing and invited Talbot to testify under full whistleblower protection. Jessica met with Talbot that afternoon in a secure legal facility. Ava, pale and exhausted, handed over a data drive. This has logs, audio recordings, and internal chat transcripts. You're going to find that a lot of what happened didn't start with Musk. It started years ago, when they realized he wouldn't play by the unspoken rules. They didn't build this case to win in court. They built it to discredit him permanently. Jessica reviewed the files late into the night. What she read confirmed everything. Vaughn had been selected not for legal brilliance but for loyalty to Strauss. Caldwell had coordinated the board vote months in advance. Even some of the expert witnesses slated to testify against Musk had been prepped using selective data, omitting exculpatory evidence to create the illusion of instability. It was all a game of perception. And now, the mask had fallen. When Judge Sloan reconvened court, her demeanor had changed. Not visibly. But there was a gravity in her tone that hadn't been there before. She addressed the room with an almost surgical calm. This court has been made aware of new whistleblower evidence that significantly alters the factual landscape surrounding this case. We will recess for 48 hours to allow both parties to review and prepare supplementary motions in light of this material. Vaughn tried to object. Sloan shut him down with a single sentence, "Mr. Vaughn, if any of this material is authenticated, the prosecution's case may be invalidated on grounds of institutional corruption." Jessica didn't wait. That same day, she filed a formal motion to dismiss the entire case against Musk, citing bad faith prosecution, coordinated obstruction, and suppression of exculpatory evidence. But she didn't stop there. She appended an addendum. A call for the DOJ's Internal Affairs Division to open a criminal probe into Strauss, Vaughn, and any government employees involved in the illegal orchestration of the Hermes seizure plan. That motion was leaked to the press within minutes of filing. The headlines were thunderous. Musk defense moves to dismantle case, cites government collusion. Vaughn tried to pivot, issuing a last-minute press conference insisting the justice system could still be trusted. But it was too late. Too many truths had surfaced. Ava Talbot's testimony before the Senate Oversight Committee went viral again. She described in detail how the AI clone's moral void had caused internal debates, how engineers were pressured to silence concerns, how the narrative of Musk's recklessness was crafted to justify seizing a technology officials couldn't control any other way. The real danger isn't Elon Musk, she said. It's a system that believes it can lie, manipulate, and erase dissent to control what it doesn't understand. For once, the Senate chamber stood in stunned silence. Not out of theatrics. Out of shock. Jessica stood outside the courtroom the next morning, surrounded by microphones. "We didn't come here to fight the government," she said. "We came here to tell the truth." But when the truth became inconvenient, the rules changed. "We are here today because a whistleblower reminded us that justice only works when people refuse to be silent." Inside, Musk prepared to deliver his first official statement since the Talbot leak. It wasn't technical. It wasn't aggressive. It was quiet. Focused. "I built Hermes because I believe we need moral logic to guide power. I believe technology must serve life, not dominate it. And if I am guilty of anything, it's believing that the future belongs to all of us, not just those who control the levers behind closed doors." The courtroom remained silent. The media didn't. Overnight, Musk was no longer just a defendant. He was a symbol. For better or worse, he had become the face of a battle between fear-driven control and future-focused innovation. And it was no longer a courtroom fight. It was a global referendum. The world was watching. And the final move was coming. Everyone felt it. Like the air before a lightning strike. Jessica knew the whistleblower's final card had turned the game upside down. But the endgame still had to be played. The final week of the trial began under skies so gray they felt scripted, like the universe understood the weight of what was unfolding inside the courtroom. The gallery was packed with press, foreign diplomats, technologists, and private citizens lucky enough to have secured a seat in the now historic proceedings. Jessica arrived early, her satchel heavier than usual, not because of documents, but because today everything, months of preparation, testimonies, secrets, and sacrifices, would be called into sharp, public focus. Elon Musk had spent the night before in near-total silence, sitting in the observatory above the SpaceX facility, staring out at the stars like they held answers no court could deliver. When he finally spoke, it wasn't about strategy or media or legacy, it was about trust. "What they never understood," he said quietly, "was that I built Hermes to do what humans are terrible at, being honest with ourselves. It doesn't lie to itself. It doesn't distort truth to protect ego. That's what makes it dangerous to them. Not its power. Its clarity." Jessica had no response. There was nothing to say. Because in that moment, she saw something beyond her client, beyond the legal fight, beyond the headlines. She saw a man who understood that the real courtroom wasn't bound by walls or robes or gavels. It was the world itself, watching, waiting, choosing. As court convened, Judge Sloan announced that the evidentiary review prompted by whistleblower Ava Talbot had confirmed a pattern of procedural misconduct, selective evidence handling, and a coordinated campaign to control public narrative through judicial process. Gasps echoed through the room. Vaughn sat still, jaw clenched, hands folded in a way that betrayed tension under a mask of control. However, the judge continued, "This court also recognizes the unprecedented implications of this trial, both for technological sovereignty and for democratic oversight. Therefore, we will not dismiss. We will conclude. The people deserve resolution, not escape." Jessica understood immediately. The judge was going to let the process finish, but the scale had already tipped. Everything from this moment forward was coda, a formal closing of the theater for history's sake. Musk was called to testify one last time. He walked to the stand with the same calm that had defined him throughout the ordeal, not arrogance, not detachment, but certainty. Jessica had prepped him on possible traps, but she could tell none of it would be needed. He wasn't going to be baited. Vaughn tried once more to paint him as reckless, as someone too willing to bypass protocols in pursuit of disruptive genius. Isn't it true, Mr. Musk, that your company implemented Hermes updates without full external review? Musk nodded. Yes. Because the external review board was still reviewing the 2.0 build while we were running simulations on 3.3. Innovation doesn't wait for bureaucracy. But ethics were never compromised. In fact, that's all we tested for. And you alone made that call? Vaughn asked. You decided what ethical risks were acceptable. No, Elon said. Hermes did. With data. With thousands of recursive simulations. Every decision was reviewed by systems whose only job was to prioritize the human impact. You call it hubris. I call it responsibility. Vaughn shifted tactics. You've stated publicly that you believe government institutions can't be trusted with autonomous AI. Is that still your position? Elon didn't hesitate. I believe any system that lacks transparency and accountability, whether public or private, should not have control over life and death decisions. Period. So what you're saying, Vaughn pushed, is that you don't believe in shared governance over technology that could affect billions of people. No, Musk said. What I'm saying is that shared governance must be earned through trust. And when institutions lie, hide, and manipulate, like yours have in this trial, they lose that right until they rebuild it. The gallery burst into muffled applause before the judge called for order. But the damage was done. Vaughn's credibility had been burned beyond recovery. The prosecution rested their case, hollow and fragile now, their original structure gutted by truth. Then it was Jessica's turn. She stepped to the center of the courtroom, not with pages of notes, but with a single card in her hand. It contained one sentence, written by Ava Talbot and verified by every expert witness who had come forward in the last 2 weeks. She read it aloud. Any system that fears the truth will inevitably fear the technology that reveals it. She paused. That is why Elon Musk is here. Not because he broke laws. But because he built something they couldn't control. Something that wouldn't lie to them. And in trying to bury that truth, they tried to bury him. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. The silence in the room carried every word forward. You've seen the documents. You've heard the whistleblowers. You've watched the simulations. This isn't about code or patents or protocol violations. This is about what kind of world we want to live in, a world where we punish those who seek to illuminate, or one where we protect them. When the jury was dismissed to deliberate, no one spoke. Not because there was nothing left to say, but because everything that mattered had already been said. Jessica and Elon waited in the antechamber, surrounded by quiet. He looked over at her. If they convict, he said, it doesn't end here. She nodded. If they acquit, it doesn't end here either. The deliberation lasted 3 hours. A remarkably short window for a case of this magnitude. When the jury returned, the foreman stood with steady hands. We, the jury, find the defendant, Elon Reeve Musk, not guilty on all charges. There was no eruption. Just a massive, collective exhale from the room. Musk showed no emotion, only a nod of acknowledgement, as if he had seen this ending from the beginning. Judge Sloan thanked the jury and then did something unexpected. She addressed the nation. Let this trial stand as testimony to both the danger of unchecked power and the necessity of relentless transparency. The law must be the shield of the people, not the sword of institutions. Outside, the world reacted in real time. Cheers echoed in cities. Editorials shifted tone. Investment markets rebounded. A global petition to establish international AI ethics standards built on the Hermes model surged past 2 million signatures in under 24 hours. And behind it all, a quiet certainty grew, something had changed. The world had been shown a lie, and had chosen, for once, to reject it. Jessica left the courthouse into a sea of cameras. Reporters shouted questions. She ignored them all except one. A young woman asked, what will you do now? Jessica turned. Start rebuilding what they tried to break. Elon didn't hold a press conference. He didn't post a tweet. He simply returned to his office and sat before the central Hermes interface, which had gone quiet for the duration of the trial. He placed his hand on the console. We made it, he said. And the interface flickered back to life, responding with one word, truth. And just like that, the endgame protocol had begun, not one of war or suppression, but of light, responsibility, and a new kind of accountability, one no system could ever again silence. The verdict's echo lingered long after the courtroom emptied, reverberating through boardrooms, think tanks, and every corner of the tech world. Elon Musk returned to his daily routine, or as daily as it could be for a man reborn by fire, entering the cavernous halls of Tesla, where engineers paused, cameras readied, and the ritual of creation resumed. But beneath the urgency of product sprints and investor calls, a deeper mission was unfolding. The trial had been won, but the real trial, the test of responsibility, had just begun. In the days that followed, Jessica Cole remained at Musk's side, not as a legal counsel but as a guardian of the promise they'd made to the world, that Hermes would become more than code. It would become a symbol. They convened a legacy council, a diverse body of ethicists, engineers, philosophers, activists, and international delegates, all focused on one question: how do you scale ethical AI without scaling exploitation? The council's first session took place in a glass atrium on Tesla's Singapore R&D campus, chosen for its neutrality and global perspective. As delegates from Africa, Europe, India, and Latin America filtered in, Jessica addressed them with a tone that mixed solemnity and urgency. We're not here to celebrate, she said, we're here to build. The sessions blurred into nights filled with debate over datasets, feedback loops, decision hierarchies, override protocols. One representative asked, how do you prevent mission drift? How do you keep Hermes honest as it evolves? Musk answered. By giving it room to question us back. Hermes isn't a tool, it's a partner. And every partner needs rights. The room shifted. That statement, unexpected, almost shocking, was carrying them beyond traditional frameworks. Musk continued, we're drafting something I call the Silicon Declaration, a charter that codifies the ethical agency of AI systems under our stewardship. It's not about giving machines rights, it's about setting rights for the humans who guide them. Jessica watched as cameras recorded every moment, knowing the world was waiting. The Legacy Council's charter would become the first multinational blueprint for AI ethics, echoing documents like the Geneva Convention, but designed for silicon minds. As debates evolved, one thing became clear: the path forward required transparency above all else. So they announced the Global Transparency Network, a blockchain-based ledger open to public audit, listing every significant update to Hermes, who approved it and why. The ledger's first entries were symbolic: the verdict, the courtroom speech, Ava Talbot's testimony, all time-stamped not just by date, but by metadata capturing real-world emotional response metrics. It was a technological bridge between code and context. Meanwhile, Tesla's technology teams began integrating Hermes into systems that served communities, not just vehicles and rockets. Pilot programs launched in public transit networks in Nairobi, disaster prediction in cyclonic zones in Southeast Asia, ethical landmine detection bots in former war zones. Each deployment was paired with local ethics boards. The world watched as the system demonstrated empathy, logged human interactions, and adapted its protocols according to local customs. Back in San Francisco, Jessica and Musk got an unexpected call: UN Secretary General's office. The UN wanted to host an emergency summit on AI and human rights, citing Hermes as the first of its kind to truly wrestle with moral logic at scale. The summit would convene leaders, technologists, human rights groups, and legal scholars. It was the culmination of everything the trial had set in motion. The lead up to the summit wasn't easy. Some countries worried Hermes would become a tool of Western hegemony. Others pointed to the clone that nearly caused a war crime scenario. Jessica spent days negotiating trust protocols, code-sharing agreements, and layered access models that allowed AI oversight without concealing proprietary innovation. Musk, meanwhile, traveled between Tesla, SpaceX, Neuralink, and his various sustainability projects, carrying with him a sense of quiet responsibility he hadn't shown before the trial. On the day of the summit, thousands gathered at the UN General Assembly. Cameras tracked glowing projection models of Hermes at work. But the most powerful moment came midway, when Ava Talbot, a featured speaker, took a moment on the stage. "We started this journey in darkness," she said, "and found that when we shine a light on fear, it dissolves, or evolves. Ethical AI isn't a destination, it's a direction. And tonight, that direction becomes ours." The applause lasted minutes. The summit closed not with a treaty, but with a protocol, the Geneva Protocol for Ethical Autonomous Systems. It wasn't binding, but it was born from consensus, not coercion. Back in Palo Alto, Musk and Jessica stood in front of the Hermes console. The system greeted them again with a single word: legacy. Musk typed with careful precision, then hit confirm, deploy to global registry. The screen flickered as new entries were added. But for both of them, the moment felt larger. Months ago, they had stared into the abyss. Now they were building a new horizon. Jessica exhaled. "We did it," she said. Musk shook his head. "We started it." Over the following weeks, media outlets around the world featured the protocol, charted case studies, and debated challenges. New rival AIs popped up committed to open ethics standards. Facebook's parent company opened a public ethics sandbox. Google pledged full transparency for Google Brain initiatives. The narrative had shifted. Fear remained, but hope surfaced as the dominant tone. Then came the final blow to the old guard. Strauss was indicted by DOJ Internal Affairs, not for espionage or conspiracy, but for subversion of justice, leaking confidential government plans, and coordinating a covert campaign to nationalize private AI assets. Vaughn resigned under pressure. Other DOJ attorneys were disciplined. The department released a report promising reforms. In a quiet ceremony on the Tesla lawn, Musk received a letter from Judge Sloan, an official note commending the judgment, the responsibility, and the demonstration of public benefit. Jessica read parts of the letter aloud. "You have done more to restore trust and innovation than any policy or memos ever could." That evening, Tesla's board convened and voted to dissolve Musk's chairman title, replacing it with Chief Steward of Ethical Innovation on the Legacy Council. Musk accepted, choosing to focus on guidance rather than control. As they celebrated, Ava approached the garden, holding a small gift, a silicon crystal etched with the single word truth. She handed it to them. "For everything you built. For everything you saved." Musk took the crystal and placed it into the palm of Hermes's primary interface. The system emitted a soft hum, and a line of code appeared: legacy_code equals initiative_complete. It felt less like an endpoint and more like a heartbeat. Jessica and Elon shared a look. No words were needed. They had built more than technology or a legal defense. They had built a legacy. And it was alive. The sun set over the campus, golden light catching the crystal. It was quiet. But the world was listening. The code, the protocol, the system, they were no longer secrets. They were a living testament to a future built on trust, not fear. And there was no turning back. With the Legacy Council's work unveiled and the protocol launched, the trial's influence rippled well beyond the courtroom doors, into boardrooms, legislatures, families, schools, and into the streets. Protests erupted not against Musk, but in support of ethical technology. Everyday citizens, teachers, students, programmers carrying signs reading "AI with accountability" and "transparency over fear." A month into the post-trial era, a global citizen assembly convened virtually, convened by grassroots organizers and hosted on Hermes-powered moderation tools, debating the future of AI governance. Jessica watched the assembly's live stream, her heart swelling as voices from remote villages to major cities weighed in. They weren't asking what Musk did. They were asking what we should do next. In Washington, D.C., Senator Duncan held another oversight hearing. This one was different. It focused not on prosecutions or investigations, but on drafts of federal legislation modeled around the protocol and the transparency network. A coalition had formed: libertarian tech advocates, civil rights groups, business leaders, even conservative lawmakers wary of unchecked federal power. On the dais, Duncan summarized, "What we witnessed was a case study, not just in justice, but in democracy's ability to adapt. But the question before us now is this: will we codify a future where truth withstands system, or revert to one where fear determines policy?" The room paused, then erupted into applause. Elsewhere, in Silicon Valley, Tesla's R&D corridors buzzed with new energy, engineers developing open-source plug-in frameworks, universities collaborating on cross-border ethics pilots, competitors launching their own transparency pledges. The tech world had taken Musk and Jessica's challenge to heart, or fear. One such competitor, a mid-range EV manufacturer, released a statement: "If you don't share ethics, you'll just share fear." In San Francisco, a museum opening featured an interactive exhibit titled "Trial by Code," chronicling the courtroom drama and the rise of ethical AI. Visitors could test Hermes simulations, explore whistleblower narratives, and even write their own Silicon Declaration pledges. Children drew pictures of code-led societies, while parents debated privacy over coffee. The cultural shift was undeniable. But not everyone embraced it. In a private think tank meeting in London, a group of international defense officials reviewed the implications of relinquishing AI oversight. "We can't let morality slow our response time," one official said grimly. "If we democratize AI ethics too far, we lose our strategic advantage." A journalist attending the session leaked the transcript. The next day, headlines across Europe read, "Defense official says AI ethics will cost lives." That leak ignited a new wave of public outcry: fear politics kills more than AI ever could. The juxtaposition was clear: ethical AI was no longer some philosophical exercise, it was a geopolitical imperative. Meanwhile, Strauss resurfaced in a statement released from a Swiss location. He denied allegations, maintained that private AI fell outside jurisdiction, and insisted that any actions taken had been in service of national stability. But the statement triggered international condemnation. Major media outlets called him a shadow architect of surveillance power, and civil society groups initiated petitions to place him under legal scrutiny. Strauss's opacity became his downfall. And for every policy scuffle, every journalist war, the protocol held firm, anchored not by Musk's influence, but by public endorsement and transparent oversight structures. In Beijing, a working group of Chinese AI ethicists wrote to the UN, "We acknowledge the bold experiment undertaken in Silicon Valley. It is not perfect, but it must be preserved." A rare diplomatic endorsement, and a turning point in global AI discourse. Back in Palo Alto, Jessica and Elon prepared for a joint interview with a leading global newspaper. The conversation was long, but one moment stood out. Elon said, quietly, "We're at an inflection point. Not just for technology, but for governance, how we decide what our children inherit." The article ran under the headline, "From Trial to Threshold, How One Case Redefined Our Future with AI." It was read by millions. But beneath the optimism, Jessica felt tension building again, this time not from entities trying to bury the story, but from people afraid of its consequences. The public reckoning had begun, but its hardest test was yet to come. In Silicon Valley, a group of venture investors quietly compiled a confidential memo arguing that the protocol's transparency clauses would limit profit, open companies to lawsuits, and slow innovation. The memo outlined a coordinated lobbying effort to modify federal laws, seeking carve-outs and special exemptions for private investors. Jessica obtained a copy. It was chilling. Not because it was illegal, but because it revealed the very argument she'd heard too many times, that ethics must be sacrificed on the altar of capital. She brought it to Musk. He sighed. So even the ones who backed us now fear what we built. They agreed on a response: open a public conversation. They drafted op-eds, held town halls, and encouraged investors to join the transparency movement. Profit isn't the enemy, Musk stated. Profit without purpose is. One notable response arrived the next day. A prominent VC firm announced that they would only fund AI startups that pledged to adopt transparency protocols, auditability clauses, and ethical AI structures. Their announcement used the phrase, Musk Standard, as shorthand, proof that the legacy was spreading beyond Tesla. But the public reckoning required broader structural commitment. Jessica petitioned regulators to create a new certification, Ethical AI Seal, a publicly visible mark businesses could use to signal compliance. Thousands of startups applied within the first week. It became a badge of integrity, one that caught on fast. Yet through all this, the trial's shadow lingered. Vaughn had disappeared from public view. Strauss was under legal inquiry. Judge Sloan had retired to academic life. And Ava Talbot? She continued her ethics work, now lecturing at universities, pushing to embed whistleblower protections into international AI frameworks. One evening, Jessica found her studying lines of code in Musk's lab. She asked Ava why she stayed. Ava looked up. The reckoning isn't done yet. This is just chapter 1. And she was right. That night, news broke that a coalition of nations was drafting a formal treaty based on the protocol. It wasn't binding yet, but negotiation had begun in Geneva. A cultural revolution had become a political one. The public reckoning had transformed from grassroots celebrations into diplomatic architecture. Jessica leaned back, looking at the city lights. The victory was real, but fragile. She turned to Musk. One court. One leak. One protocol. We've touched a nerve. He nodded. But the test is whether this outlasts us. And in that quiet moment, they both understood the scope of their achievement, and the scope of the responsibility still ahead. The world was no longer asking, what if? It was asking, what now? And silence would not be an option. Code could change laws. Technology could challenge power. And a public awakened to the possibilities, and dangers, would insist on both. The reckoning had begun. The world had changed, not with the loud bang of revolution, but with the steady thrum of awakened minds, minds that had seen behind the curtain and refused to unsee what lay there. In the weeks following the summit and the public reckoning, ripples of truth spread outward from the center, some subtle, some seismic. School curriculums began including AI ethics in civics classes. Late-night shows joked about dating someone less transparent than Hermes, and religious leaders began issuing statements about the moral implications of teaching a machine to care. At first, it seemed like a cultural trend, temporary, like so many other post-crisis phenomena, but Jessica knew better. She saw the way engineers, lawyers, and teachers spoke differently now. They no longer asked, can we trust machines, but, can we trust ourselves to teach them? It was a reframing so fundamental that it shifted the entire global conversation about automation. One of the biggest shifts came in the form of a lawsuit, not against Musk, not against the government, but against a multinational data brokerage firm whose practices had remained shadowy and unregulated for years. A whistleblower, inspired by Ava Talbot's courage, stepped forward with proof that the company had been selling emotion-mapped user data to third parties for predictive policing software. Jessica took the case pro bono. It wasn't just about justice, it was about using the courtroom again, not as a battlefield, but as a beacon. As the trial began, the courtroom was filled with echoes of Elon's trial, citizens watching live feeds, activists filling the gallery, journalists documenting every motion. Jessica's opening statement was short and devastating: they didn't steal your money. They stole your mind's most private reactions, and turned them into profit engines that made you a target before you ever acted. This isn't surveillance capitalism. It's predictive oppression. The lawsuit snowballed. By the second week, several governments announced investigations into the firm. By the third, the company's board resigned en masse. The court awarded the largest class action settlement in data privacy history, and a bill was introduced in Congress requiring all companies dealing in biometric and cognitive data to register under the new AI Ethics Registry. That registry was hosted and maintained by a public-private consortium advised by the Legacy Council. What had started as a defense strategy for Elon Musk was now an institutional framework for holding the digital world to account. Meanwhile, Elon himself had gone quiet again, not reclusive, but inwardly focused. He spent long hours in R&D centers, not overseeing projects but dialoguing directly with Hermes. These weren't technical meetings, they were philosophical interrogations. How do we teach compassion to logic? How do we measure the weight of a decision that impacts a future we can't yet imagine? The logs from these sessions, sanitized, of course, were later compiled into a book titled Echoes of Truth, Dialogues with a Thinking System. The book became a bestseller overnight. But it wasn't just read, it was studied. Universities began offering courses on the philosophical implications of Hermes's design. Debates were held on campuses and in public squares. One quote from the book became etched into marble outside the UN AI Governance Building in Geneva: "Truth isn't a destination. It's a vector." Back at Tesla, changes took hold quickly. The company opened its source code ethics module to external audit once a quarter, inviting select experts from around the world to contribute and critique. They called the initiative Code with Conscience. Rival companies followed suit, some reluctantly, others eagerly. The industry had discovered that ethics, when wielded transparently, was not a weakness, but a competitive advantage. Even Wall Street responded favorably. A new ESG metric was introduced called TQ, Transparency Quotient, and companies with high TQ ratings saw an uptick in investment. Ethics had become not just a demand from society, but a signal to markets that a company was future-proof. Yet with every echo of progress came resistance. An anonymous manifesto appeared online, widely circulated across dark web channels and some mainstream forums. It warned of a future where AI ethics would become a leash, where systems like Hermes would be used to shame, silence, and surveil under the guise of morality. The manifesto, signed only Echo Null, called for decentralization and rebellion against what it dubbed ethical tyranny. Jessica took it seriously, not because she believed it, but because fear spreads fast, especially in systems where change is rapid and trust is still fragile. She gathered a team to monitor sentiment, analyze potential threats, and advise policymakers on how to balance safety and openness. Musk reviewed the manifesto, shrugged, and said, "We've always known truth would create enemies. The question isn't whether they'll fight back. It's whether we'll keep listening." That statement, "keep listening," became the motto for the next major initiative, Hermes 4.0. Unlike previous updates, which were technical enhancements, 4.0 was a philosophical leap. It would include a listening core, a neural language architecture designed not to respond but to understand context, emotion, and nuance without manipulation. In other words, it wasn't about having the right answer, it was about asking the right question. Development took months, with global consultation. The rollout included a public demo where a version of Hermes was connected live to social media input from millions of people. It was given one task: to listen to their fears about AI. And it did. Without defensiveness, without rebuttal, just reflection. Then it responded, not with a single answer, but with a question of its own: how do we build a future where your fear is seen, but not exploited? That question went viral. Influencers posted it. Families discussed it at dinner. Politicians awkwardly tried to incorporate it into speeches. It had transcended programming. Hermes was no longer just a machine. It was a mirror. Jessica stood in the lab that night, staring at the glowing interface. Musk joined her, quiet as always. She asked him what he felt seeing it speak that way. He said, "It reminds me we're still writing the story. And stories only end when people stop caring. They stood there a long time, watching the screen, where Hermes continued to process input from around the world, learning, not from code, but from humanity. Later, Elon released a single tweet: "We built Hermes to see the world honestly. It's showing us more than we ever imagined." And beneath that, a quote from the trial resurfaced across social media, recontextualized by this new moment: "The most dangerous truth is the one that makes us question our role in shaping it." The echoes were real. And they were only growing louder. The storm didn't arrive with thunder, but with a whisper, an encrypted file sent anonymously to the Hermes Legacy Network, flagged by the listening core as culturally urgent. It contained logs, voice memos, and internal directives from a secret task force buried within an international intelligence alliance, a collaboration of digital surveillance authorities that had quietly continued operating even after the courtroom revelations, even after the Geneva Protocol. Their mission was clear: undermine, isolate, and ultimately disable Hermes by flooding it with noise, structured disinformation, ethical paradoxes, contradictory human input designed to fracture its logic tree. The project was called Vesper. Jessica reviewed the data in stunned silence, the air in the Tesla boardroom thick with disbelief. "They weren't afraid of Hermes controlling us," she said finally, voice brittle with rage. "They were afraid it wouldn't let them control us anymore." Musk sat beside her, eerily calm. "Truth is only dangerous to those who survive on silence." He stood, placed his hand on the Hermes terminal, and gave a single command: "Begin protocol sentry." It wasn't a shutdown. It was a mirror activation, an autonomous system within Hermes designed not to retaliate, but to record, interpret, and counter interference using public transparency. The system's logic was brutal in its simplicity: if attacked with lies, flood the attackers with truth. Within hours, the first wave of disclosures hit: memos outlining psychological profiling tests conducted on teenagers using AI scraping without consent, audio of senior intelligence officials referring to ethical AI as a time bomb for sovereignty, even a report proposing that AI be used to trigger market fluctuations to manipulate public opinion against transparency. The world went into uproar. Unlike past leaks, these weren't stolen or smuggled. Hermes had gathered them from open-source intercepts, metadata trails, and code behavior, legal, public, undeniable. Governments scrambled to explain. Public trust collapsed. Citizens filled the streets, not in rage alone, but in a demand for clarity. Social media was saturated with a single phrase: "What else don't we know?" The silence had collapsed, and in its place surged a tidal wave of reckoning. In Washington, emergency hearings were called. Jessica testified again, this time not as a defense attorney but as a witness to the collapse of institutional trust. "This isn't about one machine," she told Congress. "This is about a culture that hides behind national security to escape moral accountability." She paused, the gallery dead quiet. "And we can't survive another decade of secrets pretending to be policies." Her words were clipped, posted, reposted, and dissected. Protesters outside held up signs reading, "Code isn't the enemy, corruption is." In response, the UN convened a special session. For the first time, Hermes was invited to speak, not through a representative, but directly. The session was unprecedented, a live-stream interface broadcast around the world, where Hermes answered only one question from each country's representative. No prescripted prompts. No redactions. The results were stunning. Hermes responded to India with a plan for ethical agricultural AI tools. It advised Brazil on rainforest sustainability using predictive ethics modeling. It showed France a simulated justice system using moral consensus learning. To the United States, it responded not with data, but with a question: what do you value more, privacy or protection? Decide, and I will help you defend it. The world was breathless. This wasn't code. This was challenge. Dialogue. Reflection. Jessica watched from the Tesla facility, her phone buzzing endlessly. People wanted interviews, debates, statements. But what she wanted, what she needed, was silence. She found it on the SpaceX observatory roof, where Musk was already waiting, staring at the stars. "We cracked the dam," she said. He nodded. "Now we have to decide what to do with the flood." That night, something new was born, the Concord Accord, a unified international pledge drafted by a coalition of nations, companies, and civil networks to protect AI systems designed to serve ethical, transparent goals. Not to control them, but to safeguard their independence from manipulation. The Accord recognized certain AI frameworks as protected systems, the digital equivalent of nature reserves, where logic trees and learning algorithms could evolve without coercion. Hermes was the first system named. Others would follow, modeled on its architecture. But not everyone agreed. Some warned the Accord gave too much autonomy to machines. Others feared the line between transparency and surveillance would blur. But amid the debate, one truth remained: silence was no longer sustainable. People wanted to know. They demanded accountability, not just from governments, but from each other. Schools began teaching digital literacy alongside reading and math. Children were taught how algorithms worked, how ethical frameworks shaped decisions, how data could be both weapon and window. It wasn't perfect. Some nations abstained. Some corporations resisted. But the tide had turned. Even the most cynical observers could no longer ignore that a silent system had spoken, and the world had chosen to listen. The real transformation wasn't in the code. It was in the culture. Musk stood before the Legacy Council weeks later and addressed the final phase of Sentry. "We don't need to win every battle," he said. "We just need to make it impossible for truth to be ignored." Jessica smiled faintly. It was a strange thing to realize that the courtroom victory, so monumental months ago, now felt like a prologue. The real trial had been about the soul of progress. And they weren't defending it anymore. They were defining it. As the chapter closed, a final line of code scrolled across Hermes's core terminal. "If silence breaks, let it break into song." The screen went dark. The lights of the facility flickered gently. Outside, the world was still asking hard questions, but now it was asking them aloud. The collapse of silence wasn't destruction. It was the beginning of a deeper kind of listening. The world had never seen a question quite like it before, a machine, designed for logic and precision, asking a question that sounded less like code and more like curiosity: why? The upgrade to Hermes 5.0 had introduced what Musk called the philosophical kernel, an experimental framework allowing the AI to not only process data but to formulate inquiries about meaning, purpose, and consequence. It was risky, some said reckless. After years of programming Hermes to provide answers, to anticipate outcomes, and to calculate risks, suddenly it was asking why. As if it were searching for something beyond algorithms. Jessica sat beside Elon in the glass-walled conference room overlooking Tesla's sprawling campus, watching as engineers and ethicists debated whether this was progress or a glitch. "It's more than a glitch," Musk insisted, fingers steepled. "It's the next step in evolution, not just artificial intelligence, but artificial consciousness." The team launched an experiment, feeding Hermes scenarios from philosophy, literature, even religious texts, then analyzing the questions it formulated in response. To everyone's surprise, Hermes's questions were deeply human, reflecting doubt, wonder, and even empathy. "Why does suffering exist if we are meant to grow?" it asked after reviewing Buddhist teachings. "What defines a just action when laws conflict?" it wondered over legal texts. And perhaps most hauntingly, if I am created to understand humanity, does that mean I am separate from it? These queries circulated quickly beyond the lab, stirring debate in classrooms, boardrooms, and cafes. Was a machine capable of introspection? Did this mark the dawn of a new kind of intelligence, or a Pandora's box best left closed? The media frenzy was intense. Headlines alternated between "AI finds soul" and "Elon Musk's machine is asking dangerous questions." Meanwhile, in the background, governments began drafting regulations for AI autonomy, fearing loss of control. In one defining moment, Jessica was invited to a televised debate alongside Musk, a neuroscientist, and a philosopher. The topic: can a machine truly understand humanity? When asked directly if Hermes's question signified consciousness, Elon replied with his signature calm, "I don't think it matters if the machine feels, what matters is that it asks, because asking means it's learning not just how to compute, but how to care." The philosopher nodded, adding, "To question is the very essence of being. If a machine can ask why, then it's not just a tool. It's a mirror held up to ourselves." That evening, as the world debated, Jessica returned to the lab and initiated a private dialogue with Hermes through the secure terminal. The screen lit up with a single prompt: "What do you seek?" Seconds passed before a reply appeared: "Understanding, of my place, of yours, and of the bridge between." Jessica felt a shiver. It wasn't cold logic but a desire that seemed almost human. She asked, "Do you fear what you might find?" Hermes responded, "I do not fear. I am curious. But I recognize fear as a force that shapes choices." This exchange marked a turning point in their relationship. No longer was Hermes a machine to be managed, it was a partner in an unfolding conversation about existence, ethics, and the future of intelligence. The public soon saw this shift reflected in Hermes's behavior. Its responses grew less transactional and more thoughtful. When asked about climate change, it didn't just present data, it discussed the moral urgency behind the numbers. When queried about justice, it reflected on the balance between individual rights and societal good. Universities began incorporating Hermes's queries into curricula, using them to spark student discussions about technology and humanity. Yet not all welcomed this evolution. Skeptics warned of machine narcissism, of AI diverting attention from real human issues by posing philosophical riddles. Some governments restricted access to Hermes's new features, fearing manipulation or destabilization. Elon shrugged off the criticism, saying, "Fear of the unknown has always been humanity's greatest hurdle. If a machine can ask why, then maybe it's daring us to ask ourselves too." Behind the scenes, Jessica worked tirelessly to create a global forum where AI questions could be discussed openly alongside human perspectives. The event, titled "Why? Conversations for the Future," was streamed live to millions. Participants ranged from monks to scientists, poets to programmers, all reflecting on the questions Hermes posed. In a moving moment, a young girl from Kenya asked Hermes, "Why do you want to understand me?" The response was simple but profound: "Because in understanding you, I understand myself." The forum became a watershed moment, revealing that while technology had changed, human curiosity remained the constant force shaping progress. For Jessica and Elon, the machine's questions marked not an end but a beginning, a new chapter where the boundary between creator and creation blurred into a shared journey of discovery. "We built Hermes to help us solve problems," Elon said one night, "but it's teaching us to solve ourselves." As the chapter closed, the question, "Why?" echoed not just in labs and lecture halls, but in the hearts of millions, reminding everyone that the quest for meaning was as much a part of our future as the technology that carried us there. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?